usually SANs require two networks, not just Ethernet. You need Ethernet in a SAN environment to do some of the more mundane or lower level communications, but the actual SAN data is coming over an iSCSI or fiber channel, fiber channel using iSCSI or fiber channel using, something else, fiber channel over Ethernet, FCOE. So most of your big data is going across the fiber channel, and your requests are probably coming across more on Ethernet. Whereas on a NAS, everything is on Ethernet. So it's a lot, there's a lot more traffic on the Ethernet side that's a slower network to start with. I mean, you can see Ethernet ends at 10 gig, fiber channel starts at 16 gigs per second. So it's just a lot faster.
Right. And with a SAN, a lot of times you have what I would think of as a traffic cop in there, right? Deciding where that traffic is allocated between, because you not only have the Ethernet stuff, but when you're talking about the fiber channel, what communications go where, they kind of have that traffic cop controller in the middle of that, right? Where with a NAS, it kind of just shows up. It looks like a drive kind of to the outside world with, and you don't have kind of what you alluded to, that specialized administration requirement, right? You don't have,
my daughter, I sent her a small NAS that she uses for her photography business. And it's a single drive network attached storage. And for her, it works fine. There's no redundancy, which is a little scary. But, for her purposes, she's only pulling up a picture or 10 pictures at a shot, and that's working fine. And she could administer it. It's simple. So basically it's plug and play. I was able to kind of set it up and ship it to her, and she plugged it into her network, and away she goes. SAN, on the other hand, would require a lot more administration and attention, just a lot more attention, just overall. Right. Now, if you have you can have multiple disks in either one, and redundancy, and it depends on how you set them up from a RAID standpoint as to what kind of redundancy you're talking about. But both of them can be pretty redundant and pretty great that way. A lot better than just a single drive on your computer or a USB drive.
That being said, we kind of think about, the interesting thing about the NAS is that they're relatively athletic as far as the use case goes. And by that, I mean, you'll see them, like a SAN, most people don't have a SAN sitting in their garage running in their home data center, right?
Not yet.
But not yet, right? Not yet. Depending on how the Internet of Things grows, we might have that much data. Well, Mr. Mike Smithers has a data center in his garage because he's got a lot of Internet of Things stuff going on. So he probably has a SAN running in his. But when we start thinking about NASs, they're actually pretty athletic, because you'll see it in a business setting, but you'll also see it just like this past week. I was talking to one of my relatives, and they have a need for managing their photographs, their personal photographs. And they went out and they picked up a Buffalo NAS. Now, not my favorite brand necessarily, but you think about those items are in a consumer environment and in a commercial environment. You could see that same thing happen in, that same unit in a small, office place someplace, theoretically. And you can change the configuration of that unit by putting in mechanical drives or SSD drives or whatever, if it's something you can add drives to. I mean, I even think about, one of our frequent guests on the Powerlunch is a great, well-known NAS provider, and that is Synology.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And one of the things that you see with NAS devices, I think that has been a relatively recent and possibly shocking change, is the way a NAS has kind of started to look more like a server.
Right.
They've
Well,
added
Synology
software,
allows you to do a ton of stuff that 5 years ago didn't really exist in the NAS.
right? And you can think about if you want to go out and spend 50 grand on a SAN and get a certain functionality, but all of a sudden 4,000, you can get that on an NAS. Those types of things, some of the types of things, not necessarily the same volume, because again, a SANs are going to be chatty and the traffic cop type of thing going on. But you know, when you think about a NAS and the ability to act like a small server within that space, or to serve up simple web pages, or to do backups and those types of things,
Some FTP functionality.
FTP functionality, and they're now building that software right into the device. I mean, literally, I went out and I have it sitting on my desk. It's a Synology 412 disk station, right? And you can get that unit on eBay for $100. You know, you got to put drives in it, but you put multiple terabyte drives in there. I mean, if you want raging speed, you obviously need to use SSDs or something. But to put just, you know, regular mechanical drives in it and have a great backup source, or even in my space, I have a machine that I use for work purposes. Then I have a machine that I use for side hustle. I do video editing with it. But if I'm moving files back and forth, that NAS is extremely handy for being able to do that. Or doing you couple that with the Veeam software, you know, because Veeam has free consumer software. It's incredibly simple. So, you know, I have more compute power just off of 2 old laptops and a used NAS than we used to run our whole business off of back in the 90s. You know, I could put a man on the moon with what I got going on here.
Right.
You know, so I don't know if you have any more thoughts on the availability of those types of units, that they become more accessible. You know, I think that one of the things that we've seen, and I think Synology used to be kind of that vendor. They've improved significantly in the last few years, but they, you know, people, you say you were going to use Synology and people kind of chuckle a little bit. You know, that was the, you know, cheap and deep storage, which it kind of still is, but I think that they've really upped their game. Now, I think there's some technology that you might want to, I don't know if I want to say steer clear of, but you might want to be aware of. Have you seen any of those USB NAS devices that you can create, John?
I'm not sure what you're.
You can get like an open source software, and you can put a bunch of USB sticks in it.
Yeah.
And I think that and people will call that a NAS, but I don't know. Do you have any experience with those things?
I've set up a couple of free NASs.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
It's a bit cumbersome to set up. It's not very user friendly. Synology's kind of really got the handle on the user friendly part in terms of setup. It's very menu driven. Free NAS, the ones that I was setting up, I did one as a customer's backup repository, and then I did one just to play around with it. And they, although they work, they were very fussy, and we ended up moving away from it for a backup repository just because it was just never got to be really stable. It just wasn't. It just didn't meet the requirements.
Right. It's not.
But you know, for a cheap solution, if you're willing to live with a little pain, you know,
if you're willing to mess around with it.
Right.
Do you notice any difference when you think about the difference between, or when you think about a Windows-based or Microsoft environment versus a Linux environment?
Well, we do a lot of Linux repositories for our cloud all of our cloud repositories for clients are Linux based, because basically they work. They don't reboot with updates. You got to manually update them, but like a Windows machine, it's going to update, it's going to reboot, you're going to lose access to your repository. It's just not as stable in that respect. It still works fine, but you got to expect some downtime, some periodic downtime with the Windows side that we don't see with the Linux side. You know, Windows machines want to be rebooted periodically. The Linux stuff, we've got a few that have been running for well over a year without having to really touch them. And they're available 24/7. And they're every bit as redundant and happy with life as the Windows machines, maybe more so.
It's interesting to me that Microsoft really hasn't ever gotten beyond that want for machines to be rebooted. That they say that you're not going to have to do that, but largely that just hasn't been the case in my experience anyway.
Well, you know, I at one point I was administering we're in a system admin for an NT4 server that had run for over 4 years. That's about the last time I've seen anything that you know, able to run that long.
Right.
Yeah, everything after that, I mean, Windows has just got a big target on its back, and so you need the security updates.
Right. Well, yeah, that part is true.